Teachers of Reddit, who are the students you remember from 5, 10, 20 years ago, and what did they do to be remembered? 5 years ago, I hosted an 8th grade study hall and classroom, a computer lab. Study hall is a joke, so as long as students stayed docile and had something out in front of them, I was happy. Computers were only allowed to be used for work. One student was looking to write an essay on Microsoft Word. I approved. He sat in the seat where I couldn't see his screen. Big mistake. Towards the end of study hall, he gathered a crowd around his computer. I went to go investigate. Upon arrival, I see a thank you for your order screen on Amazon for $15,000 worth of computer parts. The kicker, the credit card he used to order the parts was found on a website that had an inventory of stolen credit card numbers. Oh boy, kinda reminds me of my computer class in high school where the teacher was bragging about how great the school's blocking program was for NSW sites. Another kid in class with some computer skills challenged him. We were looking at P in a few minutes, LOL. He stopped everything pretty quickly after that. Not my own story as a teacher, though I am one as well, but a story I heard from one of my high school teachers. Mr. F was teaching oral interpretation at that time, basically a class on giving speeches, and there was this one student, we'll call him Billy. Whenever there was any category of speech, Billy would always find some way to give a bizarre and slightly macabre speech that still technically fit the requirements. When the class had to give a speech on how to do something, Billy demonstrated a procedure to build a miniature guillotine and used it on a Barbie doll in front of the class. It worked. When the class had to give a persuasive speech, Billy gave a speech about why OJ was actually innocent. But the real kicker was when the students had to give an informative speech about one of their hobbies. Billy discussed at length his hobby of taking the daily obituary from the paper and crossing the dead people out of the phone book. He proceeded to show off his phone book with name after name of now deceased individuals crossed out. This kid is baller as heck. I coached swimming for a prep school, so although you wouldn't classify me a teacher, I taught. I worked with a kid who was literally the most intelligent, skilled, and hardworking individual I had ever met. Still to this day, his parents were wealthy, so in addition to normal practice, they paid for me to train him one-on-one in the mornings. The pool opened at 5 AM. I would usually arrive at 4:55 AM. His parents put the accountability in him, and so he wouldn't wake them up in the morning. He would ride his bike, no matter what the weather forecast was. Not only that, but I never beat him to the pool. He was always waiting for me when I arrived. We would go over the plan for the day, and most often, he would change the intervals and distances to make them more challenging. The thing was, I was already making the workout as hard as possible. Fast forward to last week, as a freshman in scholarship to Stanford, he recently broke the Pac-12 record for fastest mile ever swum at the championships. We keep up on social media, and I know that he'll be incredibly successful later on in life. Being a swimmer myself for about 10 years now, I applaud that kid. Not only do morning practices suck, but he put effort into making them harder. The kid has got something bright ahead of him. I only taught for a year and remember lots of students, but my favorite has to be the 4th grade girl who had creative life goals. The other girls wanted to be nurses or dancers when they grew up, but this girl wrote that she wanted to be a bounty hunter obstetrician. I still get a good laugh out of that one. No point in fighting. Betsy, you're going back to face charges whether you want to or not, but first, let's get that baby out. I had a student with cerebral palsy in my British Lit class. I knew on day one that we'd get along because he was one of the few who laughed at my Monty Python reference. Dude was in a wheelchair and was in foster care, but he never complained or made excuses. He busted ass on all of his assignments, participated in group work and class discussions, and had a wicked sense of humor. I got to choose a student of the month, and I chose him. Come to find out that it was the first time he'd ever been honored for academics in school, even though he was intelligent and a good student. I'm fortunate that I had an opportunity to be his teacher and get to know him. My son has CP. Teachers like you, who can realize their limitations and also see their gifts, have been such a blessing. Thank you for taking the time to honor such a special young man. I taught computer classes for a couple of years at a private high school. I had a group of mean girls in one of the classes who decided I'd be their target and entertainment for the class period. Having teenagers of my own, not much gets under my skin, so it didn't bother me that much. In retrospect, I should have pretended it bothered me because they kept ramping it up, trying to get a reaction from me. One class period with the others egging her on, one of the girls, Sarah, stole something out of my jacket pocket. I don't remember what it was. The jacket was slung over the back of my chair. I was at the other end of the room at the time, but I saw her do it. I didn't say anything when it happened. I kept the girls after class. When I confronted them, they threw Sarah under the bus, claimed they had no idea what I was talking about. If Sarah did it, they didn't ask her to do it, so I'll let the other girls go. Sarah gave the item back to me, asked me if she was in trouble. Stealing was a big deal in that school. If I'd reported her, she would have been expelled. I couldn't see doing that to her, so I told her no. If the item had been something valuable, I might have, but it wasn't. And if it had been valuable, I didn't believe she would have taken it. Told her I knew her friends had put her up to it. Told her she might want to think about what kind of friends she had. That developed into a pretty long discussion about true friendship. Honestly, I was a little out of my element, not being a real teacher and not having any experience talking to other people's kids. So I talked to her like I would have talked to my own kids. We talked about what would happen after high school, about friends who made you happy versus friends who made you sad or angry, about how people judge you by the people you kept around you. The rest of the semester was about the same. Still had problems with the mean girls, but Sarah was quieter and didn't participate much. I figured she was embarrassed about the whole thing. I saw Sarah again a year later with a whole new circle of friends. She walked right up to me and gave me a big hug. Told me she'd never forget what I told her and smiled at me as she walked back to her friends. I hope she has a happy life. Just because you don't have the title doesn't mean you're not a real teacher. You are a real teacher, as evidenced by this story. I still remember a student. She was a troubled girl from a huge family who was having some troubles. I think the kids were sort of farmed out to different relatives. I had been trying to reach her and get her invested in school when one day, I realized it was her birthday. Another teacher and I took her to lunch off campus, totally breaking the rules. By the way, we went to Spaghetti Factory. She had never eaten in a restaurant where you got salad and an entree and dessert before. We told the server it was her birthday and she got a cupcake with a candle in it. After that, she paid much more attention in class and actually got a good grade by the end of the year. That last day of school, she showed me that she had kept the little candle in her wallet to remember that day. No big deal made at home because of some family trauma that I can't remember now. She gave me a cheap silver ring. That immediately turned my finger green, but I still have. I saw her briefly the next year, but she was failing again because her English teacher doesn't love me the way you do. Broke my heart. All she really wanted was somebody to love her. I always wondered how she turned out, but I'll never know. If ever you'd like to wear it, you can coat the inside with a tiny bit of Vaseline or clear nail polish and it won't turn your skin green because it can't touch the air to oxidize when it's heated up. Teacher for 7 years now. Special education. My kids are all fairly memorable in their own ways, but there are certain kids that come to mind much easily than others and with more frequency. For me, it is a little boy with Down syndrome who I think of involuntarily almost daily, and to be honest, I feel slightly ashamed of the why. He was a kindergartner and just learning to count. He had very limited verbal abilities, and while he was working with a speech-language pathologist, during math time our focus was math and not speech, and the way he counted was unique. He couldn't pronounce the numbers correctly, but once he mastered counting to 10, he counted everything and loudly. 1, 2, we, bear, by, see, arshi, nan. Pa, each sound overemphasized and stretched out. I work out regularly, and in working out, counting your sets is fairly standard. At the time, his counting just stuck in my head when I'd be doing my sets. To this day, I cannot count anything in my head without counting in his voice, especially when I'm working out. I have a feeling this will never go away. That is equal parts horrible and hilarious, and I am so sorry for you. Threatened to kill me. My first lesson in the school 10 years on. He's just been put in prison for robbing an old lady and breaking her hand. Classy. Yep, worth remembering that guy. Just last week a student disclosed to me that she was living away from home in a sort of youth hostel. Although she was safe, she said she was really struggling with money and would often stay home from college UK because she was too hungry. I sorted her a food parcel out for the next day and she said she was so excited to be carrying a heavy bag of food home and she would finally be able to afford tampons. I cried when she'd gone. You are amazing and everyone who helped you with that are amazing. I received one several years ago from my college instructors and it was instrumental in my being able to afford to stay and continue school to completion. No longer a teacher. By 5 years ago I was teaching freshman English and this kid just was not doing any work. I didn't want to fail him and tried to meet with him and figure out what was going on. I suspected home issues. He kept saying he had a lot going on and that he would do the work, he was just distracted. Finally contact the mom because he is not doing anything and I'm worried he is going to fail. She emails me this long email that basically said her kid was a crafty butthole who could sell ice to an Eskimo and not to trust anything he says. In the same paragraph proceeded to tell me, well, he did become a father in the fall so he has had his hands full with that. WTF lady. I was more concerned about the blasé way she talked about her 14-year-old reproducing. Yeah, he dealt with a lot. Probably still is. I honestly can remember all of my students, but the ones that pop up in my head from time to time are the ones I had an especially positive weird interaction with. 1. The student who told me she was a lesbian and wouldn't stop giving me hints that she wanted to hang out with me after school or during the summer. 2. The mentally impaired student who would make casual death threats to anybody for any random reason. Example, oh, that would be a shame if the next exam is hard and we would find you beaten in the parking lot. 20 years ago there was a little girl in my class who was rather plump, clean, never spoke and didn't have many friends. I'm only saying this to describe the sort of kid she was. One day she was slow to pack away and it was just me and her in the classroom. I had a big bag of sweets and asked her if she'd like one. She very nervously said yes and I said she could only have one if she stopped and talked to me while we had them. We had a lovely chat about her dog and her family and I picked a book off my shelf I thought she'd like to read. Every week after that she'd hang back. We'd share some sweets or whatever either of us had in our lunchbox and we'd talk about things. After a few months of this she said, I hope you don't mind giving up your break, and I said to her, I look forward to it. The class is so big we don't get time to talk and I haven't got a daughter so this is lovely. When the year ended she had another teacher but she'd still pop in and say hello, less and less often as she made friends and grew in confidence. 6 months ago I bumped into her while out shopping. I gave her a big hug. She said she remembers being very lonely at 11 but talking to me gave her something to look forward to. She went to university and was now a primary school teacher, and she always keeps sweets in her desk. This and the bloke with the beard driving the number 11 bus who wound down his window and shouted, hello Miss Div, I'm still reading. I was a volunteer English teacher in a prison. I taught the college prep courses, basics of essay format, composition and evidence-based writing. One of my guys was blatantly bipolar, and his writing was brilliant, but he kept failing, just couldn't hold it together through the term. Had something like a decade left on a 30-year sentence. A few years later, I'm walking to work and bam, there he is working with the street cleanup team. Sure enough, he'd been diagnosed bipolar, was on stable meds, holding a job and going to school. Once inpatient mental health facilities were phased out, prisons have taken their place and we wonder why there's such overcrowding in so many places. 5 years ago, a senior that was a barely getting by usually failing didn't give a crap kid, talked back, total ass that was going into the Marines like his dad and certainly wasn't interested in web design but had to take a tech course. I could eventually tell he was just trying to be a badass for the girl next to him that was a complete bad girl. So I separated them at the end of first 6 weeks and I somehow got him interested. He became one of the best in the class. I have no idea how I did it but something clicked. They eventually did a group project making a website for a business idea from one of my other classes. Not only did he lead the team and make an awesome site, but he helped the team from the other class with their business idea. Finished my class with an A. He said his first A since elementary school. I was so dang proud. I knew he would never use the ability to do web design in the Marines but maybe it showed him he could succeed. I now live to do that for another kid. I teach 3rd grade. When I give spelling tests, I tell the kids they can doodle on the back in between words. A super bright, creative girl used to write me Star Wars quizzes on the back of her tests instead. Now, some of the more curious kids sometimes write questions that I'd answer, but these quizzes were on another level entirely. Who did Han shoot in the Mos Eisley Cantina and what is Leia's home planet are a couple examples. She then include cute little doodles of the characters involved in the questions. As a huge Star Wars fan myself, possibly not as big a fan as this student though, I will never ever forget these amazing quizzes and their amazing creator. This is wonderful. In 8th grade I got in trouble for writing out musical notation on the back of unrelated quizzes. I will always remember two students I had 10 years ago, a girl and a boy. They were senior year of high school and about to graduate. They were dating and she was pregnant with his baby. I had a great relationship with them both and I had hopes they would make excellent parents. She went into labor in the middle of my class and he had to rush her out. They came to my wedding last year with their 9-year-old child. If you got pregnant at my high school they transferred you to the alternative school across town. When I was newly qualified I had a huge class of 36 pupils. I had one boy who was returning from the local pupil referral unit for behavior support. He had been through a really rough childhood and had awful attachment disorder issues. I remember on the first day I met him we had to evacuate the room because he was trashing it. I spent a lot of time working with him. When he started with me he could barely write his name. By the end of the year he was writing stories. It took a lot of work but he trusted me so was willing to try. He was a lovely kid. That was nearly 10 years ago now. He'd be 18 now. Excellent. Thank you for your support. I hope he had more teachers like you as he grew up. You have been visited by the magical duck. You don't have to do anything. He will simply give you a good day today. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.